By the winter of 1853, medical consultations had yielded no resolution, and the child's episodes continued with increasing frequency. In their desperation, her parents turned to the church, appealing first to their parish rector and later to visiting clerics reputed to have knowledge of spiritual afflictions. Surviving parish records and clerical correspondence allow the events to be reconstructed with some precision. The first inquiry was held in the family home. The rector, Reverend Lawson, accompanied by 2 assistants, conducted prayers over the child while she sat silently at the table. The service was solemn but uneventful. She neither resisted nor responded, save for her customary vacant stare. In his notes, Lawson wrote, "No evidence of possession. Child exhibits withdrawal, but not agitation in presence of prayer." He recommended continued religious instruction, but did not pursue the matter further. The parents invited a second examination, this time by a clergyman with experience in cases thought to involve demonic influence. Father William, a Catholic priest traveling through the region, agreed to observe the child. His testimony survives in a letter. "She was placed before me, and I addressed her in Latin. She listened intently, but when she spoke, it was in her unknown speech. The words bore cadence, but not resemblance to any tongue of men. I attempted adjuration in the name of Christ. She fell silent, not in fear, but as though disinterested, no convulsion, no protest, no sign of spirit engaged. The absence of reaction led him to conclude, this is no possession. The child's invention is her own, though she believes it fully." He further remarked, "It is man's invention, not God's nor the devil's." His words eliminated the supernatural as explanation, and placed the phenomenon firmly in the realm of human origin, though no less disturbing for it. A final attempt was made under the direction of an exorcist known to the family by reputation. This ritual, performed in the parish hall with witnesses present, involved the recitation of scripture, the use of holy water, and the laying on of hands. The child endured the proceedings without disturbance. When addressed, she answered in her strange speech, calm and unbroken. Observers noted the absence of any struggle. The exorcist concluded reluctantly that no unclean spirit is here, and advised the parents to seek the counsel of physicians rather than priests. The cumulative effect of these inquiries was disappointment and confusion. The parents had hoped for clarity, either confirmation of possession, or release through ritual. Instead, they received only denials. Unwilling to attribute her condition to the demonic, the clergy dismissed the episodes as human fabrication, or affliction of the mind. For the investigators who later examined the record, this stage marks a turning point. With the supernatural excluded, the weight of the case returned to the realm of psychology, where explanation remained inadequate. The solemnity of ritual had provided no relief. It had only deepened the unease. What remained was the stark fact of a child who spoke a language no one could identify, unassisted by medicine, unacknowledged by faith, and increasingly isolated by both. By early 1854, the child's case had passed from curiosity into notoriety. The incident at the parish school was not easily forgotten, and the subsequent procession of doctors and priests through the family's modest home did not go unnoticed by neighbors. Local gossip, preserved in letters and recollections, marked her as the strange girl, and suspicion began to harden into fear. Several testimonies describe whispered exchanges at the marketplace and after Sunday service. One woman remarked that, "The child looks upon you as though hearing some other voice." Another declared, "She has hurt before and she will hurt again." The impression of danger attached itself to her reputation, so that even those who had never witnessed her episodes avoided her presence. Already strained by conflicting advice from physicians and clergy, the parents responded by limiting her movements. She was withdrawn from regular schooling, excused on grounds of delicate health. Outings became rare, and visits to neighbors ceased entirely. Within the home, she was kept occupied with simple tasks under the mother's supervision, while the father pressed for stricter discipline. The house, once ordinary, grew tense and airless, as if containing both shame and dread. Witness accounts suggest that her episodes did not diminish with confinement. Instead, they altered in character. Neighbors reported hearing sounds through the thin walls of adjoining homes, murmurs in her unfamiliar speech, continuing late into the night. One entry in her mother's diary notes, "She whispers in her sleep, sometimes with eyes open, sometimes turned to the wall. It does not cease when I rouse her." Another reads, "The voice is low but constant, as though speaking to another who answers." The effect upon the parents was corrosive. The father grew convinced that she was feigning, writing in one letter, "She pretends at foolishness, but knows well what she does." The mother, by contrast, described her as unaware, lost in converse with no one. Their disagreement deepened the sense of isolation within the household itself. Records indicate that her whispering developed a peculiar regularity. Observers described repetitions, as though certain phrases were returned to night after night. On one occasion, the mother transcribed a fragment as she heard it, "Vorin taklin Mecca." Though meaningless to her, she noted that the same sounds recurred days later. Such consistency lent the impression not of random babble, but of dialogue sustained over time. The neighbors' hostility grew as rumors spread. Some claimed that the family concealed violent outbursts. Others insisted she was mad, or worse. A few suggested she should be removed to an asylum before further harm was done. Though unsubstantiated, these reports reinforced the family's decision to restrict her entirely. For the child, the result was a narrowing world, confined rooms, watchful parents, and the echo of her own voice through the night. For those outside, the sense was of danger building behind closed shutters. In either case, the effect was the same. She became the object not of understanding, but of fear, marked by whispers in the dark and a language that no one could interpret, least of all those closest to her. In late February 1854 occurred the incident that brought the family to the threshold of separation. Surviving notes from the father's correspondence, corroborated by the mother's diary, describe the episode in blunt detail. It was the first act of serious violence within the home, and it altered the course of the child's treatment thereafter. According to the record, the father discovered the child seated at the table, producing yet another series of drawings. Sheets of paper were filled with her recurring symbols, arranged in rows and clusters. Several had already taken the form of distorted faces, elongated and grim, built from the familiar characters. The father, irritated by what he regarded as continued defiance, attempted to remove the paper. At that moment, the girl resisted with sudden force. Rising from her chair, she clutched the pages tightly and struck at his arm when he tried to pull them free. When he persisted, she lunged forward, driving the corner of the slate she had been using against his hand. The sharp edge cut through the skin between thumb and forefinger, producing a wound described in his letter as deep with blood sufficient to soil the floor. The father staggered back, shocked as much by the assault as by the injury. The mother, who witnessed the event, recorded her fear at intervening. Her face was set as though I did not know her, she wrote. I could not move for dread. The child, having secured the papers, retreated to the corner of the room and sat motionless, clutching them as if they were to be defended at any cost. The wound was washed and bound, though the father refused to summon external aid, unwilling to expose the matter further to neighbors. In his account, he described the cut as painful, but not mortal. His greater concern lay in the fact that his daughter, not yet 8 years of age, had struck him with deliberate intent. The aftermath was decisive. That evening, the father declared that the child could no longer remain in the household. In his view, her behavior was both violent and ungovernable, and her presence endangered all within the home. He spoke openly of commitment to an asylum, citing recent cases of juvenile lunacy that had been confined to such institutions. The mother resisted, though her objections were marked more by fear than by conviction. She acknowledged the danger, but pleaded that her daughter was ill, not wicked. Her diary entry from that night reflects the depth of her conflict. If she goes away, she will not return. If she stays, I cannot say what we shall endure. The child herself offered no explanation. After the outburst, she fell into one of her silences, staring again at the wall, her drawings clutched in her lap. She did not respond when questioned, nor acknowledge the blood still visible on her father's bandage. This episode, preserved in the plain terms of wound and witness, stripped away the remaining illusions of harmless eccentricity. The child's silence, her symbols, her speech, these could no longer be dismissed as idle fancy. They had culminated in blood. For the father, the decision was clear. For the mother, the dread was heavier still. The question remained, would the household surrender her to the grim wards of the asylum, or continue to contain a danger within their own walls? In March 1854, following the domestic incident that left her father injured, the child was presented to Dr. James Mortimer, a London physician with an interest in mental disorders. Unlike his colleagues, Mortimer resisted the prevailing diagnosis of hysteria or epilepsy. Instead, he proposed a rare and little documented condition, which he termed pathological imagination. His report survives in lecture notes delivered before a small circle of practitioners, and though the terminology is archaic, its content sheds light on the case. Mortimer began by summarizing the child's history. He noted the incidents of silence, the production of symbols, the structured but unrecognizable speech, and the episodes of violence when interrupted. These, he argued, did not conform neatly to established categories of moral insanity or monomania. Instead, he identified in her case the absorption of narrative into the faculties of belief, until the line between memory and invention ceases to exist. His lecture notes record the following: this child is not possessed, nor merely fanciful. She is gripped by a condition in which an idea, once introduced, becomes as real to her as the external world. Stories enter her mind not as fictions, but as experiences. She inhabits them as one inhabits a chamber, and in doing so, she alters her conduct accordingly. The origin of her belief, he suggested, could be traced to the tales told by her orphanage nurse. Accounts collected from Bath indicated that the nurse, Nanny E., often entertained children with stories of other worlds, of companions unseen, and of promises made to those who befriended them. For most children, these were passing fancies. For the subject, however, they became foundational truth. Mortimer wrote, "I believe this child is persuaded with utter conviction that she is not of our world, but of that described to her in infancy. Her language, her symbols, her conduct, these are the architecture of a second reality, constructed and maintained with consistency." To illustrate his point, he presented examples from her speech. He noted repeated suffixes when she referred to objects, and the use of similar syllables in sequences, as if denoting plural or tense. This is not idle jargon, he argued. It is system, governed by rules of which she alone is custodian. He concluded that such invention was not voluntary deceit, but symptomatic of her disorder, a private world so persuasive to her that it demanded expression in forms inaccessible to others. The implications of Mortimer's diagnosis were unsettling. If accurate, the child's affliction was not mere madness, but the construction of a self-sustaining reality, one immune to correction. Treatment, he admitted, was uncertain. Isolation would likely reinforce the delusion. Discipline would provoke resistance. He suggested careful observation and the avoidance of harsh measures, though he conceded that the prognosis was poor. Mortimer's theory was received politely, but without consensus. Some colleagues dismissed it as speculative, preferring the safer labels of hysteria or moral defect. Yet his words left a record distinct from theirs, a recognition that the child's utterances bore coherence, and that her conviction in them was absolute. The case thus shifted in tone. No longer was she merely unruly or hysterical. She was, in Mortimer's view, a mind inhabited by a story so deep that it had replaced reality itself. Whether this constituted illness, or something beyond the reach of science, remained the unanswered question. A framework to explain the child's condition was provided for the first time by Dr. Mortimer's diagnosis of pathological imagination. Yet within the household, it found little acceptance. The father, described in correspondence as a man of rigid character, rejected the theory outright. To him, the language of imagination sounded like indulgence, and he regarded the physician's recommendation of careful observation as weakness. His conclusion, recorded in a letter to his brother, was blunt: "This is no sickness, but stubborn deceit. She must be broken of it." From that point, the father assumed primary control of the child's conduct. Discipline became the household response to her episodes. When she lapsed into her silent stares, he shook her by the shoulder or forced her to recite prayers aloud until her voice faltered. When she spoke in her strange tongue, he struck her hand with a cane, declaring that only English is permitted. On more than one occasion, he confined her to her room for hours without food, believing that hunger would teach her obedience. The records of these punishments survive mainly in the mother's private notes, written with a mixture of fear and resignation. She described the child as growing thin, her sleep disturbed, her whispering more frequent. She wrote, "She is pale and shakes, yet he persists. I dare not oppose him, though I fear he drives her to ruin." Another entry observes, "She stares longer now, and when she does speak, it is only in that other voice." He calls it defiance. I cannot say it is so. The deterioration was evident. By April of 1854, the child experienced fainting spells following the punishments. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices within the home, followed by long periods of silence. One visitor, a cousin of the mother, described the atmosphere as like a prison, the child cowed and the man severe. In his own correspondence, the father claimed success. He wrote that she answers quicker when struck, and that her silences were shortened by discipline. To him, the appearance of compliance was evidence of improvement. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. Her drawings continued in secret, her whispering intensified at night. The strain between parents deepened. The mother began to resist, though quietly. She argued that the child was ill, not willful, and that Mortimer's diagnosis should not be dismissed. The father rebuked her, accusing her of weakness and indulgence. Their conflict, though contained within the walls of the house, marked a fracture in the family's unity. The cruelty of these measures did not extinguish the child's behaviors. Rather, it seemed to entrench them. What the father regarded as rebellion may in retrospect be read as the persistence of her inner world against the force of his authority. The household had shifted from a place of uneasy concern to one of open hostility, with the child caught between silence, punishment, and collapse. The official records are silent on the father's conscience, if he felt any. What remains are the testimonies of injury and exhaustion, a girl weakened by correction, a mother doubtful of her husband's judgment, and a home descending into a quiet violence that no diagnosis could mend. By the summer of 1854, the strain within the household had begun to affect not only the child, but her mother. Surviving diary entries preserved among family papers reveal a steady decline in the woman's health and perception. The entries, written at irregular intervals and with increasing agitation, provide the first indication that the burden of her daughter's condition was no longer confined to one member of the family. The earliest note of significance reads, "I heard her voice though she was sleeping. I thought she spoke English, but when I leaned closer, it was the other tongue, clear, steady, as though addressing someone unseen." This observation aligns with prior reports of the girl whispering in her sleep. Yet the mother adds a new dimension, that the words seemed not only audible, but recognizable in pattern, as though fragments of them were already known to her. Further entries suggest the phenomenon intensified with the mother's exhaustion. "I have not slept more than an hour in 2 nights. The words repeat in my ears though she is silent. When she wakes, I am unsure which of us has dreamed." Such passages point not to supernatural influence, but to the erosion of her own boundaries between waking and sleep. The language, once an external oddity, had begun to invade her private consciousness. Neighbors reported that she appeared pale and drawn, with eyes red from lack of rest. One visitor described her as startled by common sounds, as though hearing something else beneath them. The father, in his letters, referred to her as nervous and excitable, dismissing her concerns as weakness. He remained fixed upon punishment, while she grew increasingly persuaded that the condition was consuming more than just their child. The most disturbing confession appears in an entry dated August 12. "She spoke in the other tongue, and I answered. I do not know what I say. She looked at me with recognition. I cannot bear to think of it." The line is brief but chilling. It suggests that under strain, the mother not only heard the strange language, but momentarily participated in it, whether consciously or not. Her physical health deteriorated alongside her mental state. She reported faint spells, trembling hands, and persistent headaches. Her handwriting across the pages grows uneven, words trailing into margins. She ceased attending church regularly, avoiding neighbors for fear of their questions. Her isolation became nearly equal to that of her daughter, though self-imposed. The investigators who later reviewed these documents described them as evidence of psychological contagion. The theory holds that prolonged exposure to the child's behavior, combined with sleeplessness and constant dread, led the mother to adopt fragments of the delusion herself. There is no suggestion of shared reality, only of one mind collapsing under the weight of another's. By the close of summer, the household contained two figures of instability: the child, still absorbed in her private language, and the mother, now haunted by echoes of it. The father remained unyielding, but the balance of fear had shifted. No longer was the child the sole object of unease. The mother's confessions raised a new and unsettling question. By the autumn of 1854, the family's situation had drawn formal notice. Reports from local physicians, along with parish records, indicate that the question of institutionalization was raised with increasing frequency. The child's continued episodes of foreign speech, her violent resistance when interrupted, and the mother's evident decline in health combined to form a case for commitment. The pressure came first from the medical side. Dr. Mallory, who had examined her months earlier, issued a renewed recommendation that she be placed under supervised care, where discipline and treatment may be applied consistently. His statement emphasized the dangers of keeping her within the household, noting injury has already occurred, and further incidents are to be expected. Other physicians, though differing in their diagnosis, converged on the same conclusion: the home was unsuitable. Social factors compounded the medical advice. Neighbors had begun to speak openly of the family's shame. Letters from acquaintances refer to the household with the mad girl, a phrase that carried the weight of stigma in a community where mental illness was regarded as both hereditary and corrupting. The parents' standing in the parish declined. Invitations ceased, and business with the father's trade suffered. The unspoken consensus was that the child must be removed, if not for her sake, then for the family's reputation. Within the home, the conflict between parents reached its breaking point. The father, citing both medical opinion and social necessity, argued forcefully for commitment. In a letter drafted to his brother, he wrote, "It is not cruelty, but prudence. She is unfit for society and a danger to her kin. The asylum is her only place." He presented the matter as settled fact, an administrative step rather than a moral choice. But the mother resisted. Her diary entries from this period reveal desperation: "If she goes, she is lost to me forever. The walls there are for the condemned, not the ill. I cannot sign her away." She appealed to Mortimer's earlier theory of pathological imagination, insisting that with patience her daughter might yet recover. She pleaded that isolation in an asylum would destroy her completely. The conflict between them became visible to others. Witnesses described strange silences at church, the mother's absence from parish gatherings, and the father's increasing severity in public. The marriage itself was recorded in later commentary as fractured beyond repair, a union broken not by infidelity or poverty, but by the presence of a child no one could explain. The administrative machinery of the time treated the question clinically. The asylum was not a place of treatment in the modern sense, but of containment. Commitment required signatures and testimony, not proof of cure. To send her there was to remove her from sight, an act as much about preserving social order as addressing illness. Thus the decision narrowed to two voices, the father insistent on removal, and the mother clinging to resistance. Between them stood the child, silent or whispering in her invented tongue, her fate determined not by her words, but by the contest of those who claimed authority over her. The case documents end without resolution in that moment, only the record of debate. The suspense was not whether she was ill, but whether her family would abandon her to the walls of the asylum. The surviving records indicate that the child was formally admitted to a county asylum in November of 1854. The admission register lists her by initials only, M.H., aged 8 years. The cause of commitment is recorded in the language of the time, juvenile lunacy, elaborate delusion. No further description of her family is provided, save the father's signature on the admission form. The asylum documents, preserved in fragmentary form, present her condition with the cold detachment of institutional routine. One entry describes her as small, undernourished, pale in complexion. Another, written by the attending physician, remarks, speech incomprehensible, delivered in phrases with consistent cadence. Utterances have no meaning, but are repeated as if structured. He concludes with the judgment that her language was fabricated invention sustained by disordered imagination. Within the wards, she appears to have been placed among older patients, most suffering from chronic conditions. A note from a warder describes her as silent for long periods, then speaking rapidly in her jargon. She was not considered violent.